For 49 straight years, the Ford F-Series has been the best-selling truck in the United States. Not just the best-selling truck, the best-selling vehicle, period, for 44 of those years. Ahead of every car, every SUV, every electric vehicle that has ever launched. With $1 billion of fanfare and a celebrity endorsement, the F-Series alone generates more annual revenue than most Fortune 500 companies. And the reason is simple. Americans don't just buy pickup trucks, they believe in them. The truck is the identity. The truck is the livelihood. And for exactly that reason, there is a truck being built right now that Detroit is not allowed to talk about. It has never been sold in the United States. It cannot legally be sold in the United States without a 100% tariff, making it economically impossible. And yet, product planners at Ford, General Motors, and Toyota are studying it more carefully than almost any vehicle released in the last decade. Because in the markets where it is sold, Australia, Mexico, Brazil, the UK, it is doing something no one expected. It is winning, not surviving, not carving out a niche, winning. Against trucks with 50-year reputations, against badges people inherit from their fathers, against the most loyal customer base in the automotive world. It is called the BYD Shark 6. It was built by a Chinese company that had never constructed a single pickup truck before. And if you want to understand why American automakers are more nervous than they have been in a generation, the story of this truck is where you start. But before we get into what the Shark actually is, we need to talk about something almost nobody discusses. We need to talk about why the pickup truck was the last vehicle on Earth anyone expected to change and why that made it the perfect target. There are vehicles people like, and then there are vehicles people will argue with a stranger about at a gas station. In the United States, that list is short. The Ford F-150, the Chevy Silverado, the Ram 1500. In Australia, you add the Toyota HiLux. In Mexico, the HiLux again, plus the Ford Ranger. These trucks are not just products. They are proof of something. Proof that you work hard, that you carry your weight, that you know what a real vehicle is supposed to be. That kind of loyalty is worth more to a manufacturer than any single engineering advantage. When a customer is that emotionally committed, you do not need to reinvent anything. You need to maintain the reputation. And Ford and Toyota maintained it for half a century by delivering exactly what those buyers expected: a diesel engine with deep torque, a proper steel ladder frame underneath, a low-range gearbox for when the going gets rough, and a name on the tailgate that meant you would get home no matter what. That formula worked. And there was a second reason it worked, one that is more structural and harder to overcome. Building a truly great diesel engine is not something you do in 3 years. It takes decades of iteration. Toyota has been refining its diesel engineering longer than most engineers alive have been working. The knowledge is embedded in the company. It lives in the metallurgy decisions, and the combustion timing and the weight tolerances are held through 100,000 hard kilometers. A new company trying to enter the pickup segment did not just face a brand loyalty problem. It faced a century of accumulated mechanical intelligence it could not buy or copy fast enough to compete. That was the wall. That was the reason the pickup truck sat untouched while sedans and hatchbacks and small SUVs went electric all around it. And that was exactly the reason BYD did not try to climb over it. BYD looked at that wall and did something the incumbent manufacturers did not see coming. It walked around it entirely. Because if you design a truck where the petrol engine is mainly a backup generator rather than the primary power plant, you do not need 100 years of diesel engineering to compete. You need great electric motors. And electric motors happen to be one of the things BYD knows how to build better than almost anyone on the planet. That single decision to reframe the question entirely is the reason this story exists. The truck BYD built sits on what it calls the DMO platform, Dual Mode Off-Road, and that name tells you the entire philosophy before you even see the vehicle. This was not a BYD electric car that got a load bed bolted onto it. It It was not a diesel truck that got a battery added as an afterthought during a regulatory panic. It was designed from a blank piece of paper as a plug-in hybrid off-roader, with the combustion engine and the electric motors treated as equal partners from the very first sketch. Here is what that means in practice. The Shark 6 has a 1.5-liter turbocharged petrol engine. It also has two electric motors, one driving the front axle, one driving the rear. And it carries a 29.6 kilowatt-hour battery pack that uses BYD's proprietary blade battery chemistry, a lithium iron phosphate formulation that is notoriously stable and genuinely hard to ignite, even under severe damage. Most of the time, in normal daily driving, the truck runs entirely on electricity. The petrol engine's main job is to generate more electricity when the battery runs low and to provide additional muscle when the truck is working hard. You plug it in at home overnight, and for most people, most weeks, the engine barely runs at all. Now, before you picture something fragile and compromised, let us talk about what this arrangement actually produces at the wheels. The combined output of the petrol engine and the two motors is 321 kilowatts. In the numbers people actually use. That is 430 horsepower and 650 newton meters of torque. That is more power than the V8 engines that Ford and GM have spent decades telling their customers are the gold standard of truck performance. And this truck gets from 0 to 100 kilometers an hour in 5.7 seconds. There are performance sedans that cannot match that number. But raw horsepower is not even the compelling part. The compelling part is when the power arrives. Every person who has ever driven a diesel truck off-road knows the feeling of pressing the throttle on a slippery climb and waiting. The engine builds, revs, the turbo spools. The gearbox thinks about which ratio to pick. That delay is measured in fractions of a second, but on a loose surface with momentum running out, fractions of a second are everything. An electric motor has no delay. The moment you ask for torque, every single newton meter is there. And because the Shark has one motor at each axle, the software managing those motors can redistribute power between them in milliseconds, reacting to grip loss almost faster than the driver can perceive it happening. The practical effect for the person behind the wheel is that the truck feels as though it has more traction than the ground should logically allow. You point it at something difficult, you press the pedal, and it climbs. Not because a computer is visibly rescuing you, because the system is working continuously, quietly, at a speed no mechanical differential can match. And then there is the feature that has nothing to do with driving at all. The feature that, once you have experienced it, makes every competitor's truck feel like it is missing something obvious. Picture a standard workday for someone who drives a truck for a living. You arrive on a site with no mains power. You need to run a drop saw, an angle grinder, a drill. Normally that means a petrol generator in the tray. Fuel to carry, noise to endure, fumes to breathe all day. Or picture a camping weekend 3 hours from the nearest town. You want a fridge running? Some lights? Maybe a coffee machine? Normally that means a separate battery system, a solar panel, and a lot of careful planning about what you can and cannot turn on at the same time. The Shark 6 replaces all of that with power sockets built into the vehicle. Because it is already carrying a large battery pack for its drivetrain, BYD simply lets you pull that energy back out through standard household outlets. Up to 6.6 kilowatts of continuous output. That is enough to run a full work site's worth of hand tools simultaneously. It is enough to run a family camping setup for a weekend without the engine ever needing to turn on. And it is enough, if the power goes out at your house, to keep your fridge, your lights, and your internet running for hours while the truck sits quietly in the driveway. Here is the part the legacy brands have to reckon with. That feature does not cost BYD anything extra to offer. The battery was always going to be in the truck for the drivetrain. The sockets are a rounding error in the bill of materials. But for the buyer, it replaces a piece of equipment, the generator, that used to cost hundreds or thousands of dollars and took up space and required its own maintenance. You are not paying more for the power station. It falls out of the design for free. Once a tradie plugs their tools directly into their truck and drives home without stopping for fuel all week, the calculation changes. Going back to a diesel with a separate generator is not just inconvenient, it feels like going backward. And then there is the number that does more damage to the incumbents than any feature, the number that lives in the monthly fuel bill. A diesel truck owner in a demanding job drives every single kilometer on burning fuel. There is no alternative. The engine is always running, always consuming, whether they are idling in traffic, cruising at highway speed, or waiting outside a school. Across a working year, in markets where fuel prices have become a genuine source of financial stress, that adds up to a number that gets noticed. The Shark 6 is designed around the opposite logic. The daily commute, the school run, the trip to the hardware store, all of it happens on electricity charged from a home outlet. For most users in most weeks, the petrol engine is running for an hour or two at most. The cost per kilometer in that mode is a fraction of what diesel costs. The petrol engine exists as your safety net for the long weekend drive, the remote trip where chargers are 3 hours apart, the big towing job. You get the efficiency of an electric vehicle for ordinary life, and the range and familiarity of a combustion engine for the moments you actually need it. For a private buyer, that represents a real and meaningful saving over several years of ownership. But now, multiply it by 50 trucks in a fleet. The fuel savings stop being a financial footnote. They become a procurement argument. And procurement departments that have automatically reordered diesel trucks for 15 years are starting to run the numbers, and the numbers are making them look at different columns of the comparison spreadsheet. Step inside the cab and the generational distance between the Shark and its competitors becomes impossible to ignore. The first thing you see is a 15.6-inch center touchscreen, the largest in the segment, paired with a 10.25-inch digital instrument cluster. There is a head-up display. There are heated and ventilated front seats, wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, a Dynaudio 20-speaker sound system. The materials feel more expensive than the price tag suggests. The dashboard design is calm, horizontal, inspired by what BYD describes as a spacecraft console aesthetic. And none of it is a gimmick retrofit. It was designed into the vehicle from the beginning. Now sit in a diesel HiLux or a base-spec Ranger at a similar price. You will find a smaller screen that feels a generation behind. Rows of physical buttons carried over from a platform engineered years or even a decade ago. An interior that prioritizes durability over modernity. And there is nothing wrong with that. Those trucks are tools, but when a buyer sits in one and then sits in the Shark, the contrast is not subtle. It feels like the difference between a phone from 5 years ago and one from last week. That gap exists because of something structural that BYD exploited without even trying. A truck platform costs hundreds of millions of dollars to develop. Manufacturers amortize that investment over 10, sometimes 15 years of production. The platform a buyer sits in today may have been engineered when the iPhone 6 was current. BYD did not carry any of that legacy. It designed the Shark's cabin for 2024, not 2014. And facelifts and infotainment upgrades cannot fully close that gap once it exists. Now here's the part of this story that most people gloss over, but it is the most strategically revealing decision BYD made with this truck. When BYD finished building the Shark 6, its home market, China, was the logical place to launch it. China is the largest car market on the planet. BYD is the dominant player there. The obvious move is to launch at home, build volume, and expand from strength. That is what every company does. BYD launched it in Mexico and barely sold it in China at all. That sounds bizarre until you understand the regulatory reality. In China, pickup trucks are classified as light commercial vehicles, not passenger cars. That classification triggers restrictions on where and how they can be driven, particularly in urban areas. The regulatory environment that makes China enormous for sedans and SUVs makes it a limited and constrained market for pickups. So the home market advantage that should have been BYD's biggest asset was functionally unavailable. BYD looked at the map and asked where pickup trucks are genuinely part of the culture, not cargo carriers, culture. And the answer was Mexico, then Brazil, then Australia, one of the most brutally competitive ute markets on the planet, where the Ford Ranger has been the single best-selling vehicle overall for 3 consecutive years, and where the Toyota HiLux is something close to a national institution. Launching in those markets was not a soft entry, it was a declaration. BYD did not build a truck and hope it would do well somewhere. It built a truck specifically for the heartland of Ford and Toyota's truck dominance, and it launched there first. And the market's verdict has been delivered. In 2025, the BYD Shark 6 recorded over 15,500 private sales in Australia, comfortably outselling the Toyota HiLux's roughly 12,500 private deliveries, the first time in Australian history that a Chinese brand had ever achieved that. Chinese utes as a whole went from 6.8% of the Australian ute market in 2024 to 16% in 2025, and the Shark 6 was the single vehicle responsible for most of that movement. That did not happen over a decade of patient brand building. The first allocation of 2,000 units sold out in 24 hours. The market responded to what the truck actually was, not to what brand it wore on the tailgate. The incumbents are responding. Ford has launched a plug-in hybrid version of the Ranger, adding electrified assistance to its best-selling global platform for the first time. Toyota has accelerated its HiLux electrification roadmap, with both plug-in hybrid and full battery electric versions now confirmed for development. Other Chinese brands, Great Wall Motors, JAC, MG, have entered the segment with their own plug-in hybrid utes. The space that BYD opened is filling fast, which is how disruption is supposed to work. One outsider proves the demand is real and forces everyone else to move. But there is a final chapter to this story that most coverage has not fully reached yet. BYD is not stopping at the Shark 6. BYD's management has confirmed that a full-size pickup sized to compete directly with the Ford F-150, the Chevrolet Silverado, and the Ram 1500 is in active development, with industry analysts expecting an arrival around 2027. And here is the detail that matters. Unlike the American full-size trucks sold in Australia, which require expensive right-hand drive conversions that push sticker prices well past 100,000 Australian dollars, BYD's version will be built in right-hand drive from the factory. The cost advantage that made the Shark 6 competitive in the mid-size segment would apply with even more force in the full-size segment, where conversion premiums are even larger. Simultaneously, the Shark 6 has just entered the UK and Europe at the equivalent of $63. It has arrived in Southeast Asia. And the 100% tariff wall that currently protects the US market from Chinese-made vehicles, a wall that does not exist in most of the world, is a political instrument, not a technological one. Political instruments change. Let us pull all of this back to the level that actually matters, because this is not really a story about one truck. The US pickup market was worth over $81 billion in 2025. The F-Series has been America's best-selling truck for 49 consecutive years, and the best-selling vehicle of any kind for 44 of those years. Pickup trucks represent roughly 38% of Ford's total US sales, and are the single largest driver of profit for all 3 Detroit manufacturers. The American truck market is the most defended, most profitable, most emotionally entrenched automotive category on the planet. It is the last place anyone expected a Chinese company to be relevant. And in every market where BYD has been allowed to show up, it has become relevant immediately. Not eventually, immediately. The Shark did not win by building a better diesel. It did not out Toyota on reliability reputation, or out Ford on heritage. It redefined what the competition even was. It competed on the things buyers actually experience every day: the cost of the fuel they are not burning, the tools they are not dragging in from the back of a separate van, the screen that feels like it belongs in this decade rather than the last one. And it left the areas where the incumbents were genuinely untouchable: the century of diesel engineering, the decades of hard-earned reliability data simply outside the arena of competition. The moat still exists, but the castle it was protecting has been quietly surrounded from a direction nobody was watching. If this breakdown gave you a new way to think about what is actually happening to the most profitable vehicle segment on Earth, hit the like button right now. It takes serious research to build these videos, and your support keeps it going. Subscribe and turn on notifications if you want to catch the next one. And tell me in the comments, if the BYD Shark 6 landed in your country tomorrow at a price that undercut the Ranger and the HiLux, would you seriously consider it? Or is the badge on the tailgate still worth more to you than everything else on the spec sheet? I want to know where everyone actually lands on that.